When I bought my property by the lake, I imagined peace, quiet, and the kind of independence I had always dreamed about. My backyard sloped down into sparkling blue water, and tied to my dock was my pride and joy, a 24-foot cabin cruiser I had spent years restoring. Every board, every bolt, every inch of varnish carried the memory of long nights in my garage. That boat wasn't just a toy, it was a piece of my soul. I knew there was a homeowners association in the neighborhood, but I never cared much. My property was technically outside their jurisdiction, and my deed made it clear that I wasn't bound to their endless list of rules.
For a while, it was fine.
I kept to myself, waved politely when I crossed paths with neighbors, and spent my weekends fishing, cruising, or simply sitting on my boat watching the sun dip beneath the horizon. But the HOA had other plans. Chapter 2. Karen. The queen of control. Every HOA has a figurehead, and ours came in the form of a woman named Karen Whitmore. She was the president, the self-proclaimed enforcer of community standards, and the kind of person who thrived on making other people's lives difficult. Her hair was always perfectly sprayed into place, her lips painted a shade of red that screamed aggression, and her voice had the sharp edge of a drill sergeant. The first time she approached me, she had a clipboard in hand. "You know," she said, eyeing my boat like it was a nuclear warhead, "boats are supposed to be stored in the HOA marina, not private docks. It's for uniformity, aesthetic reasons." I pointed at the property line markers and handed her a copy of my deed. "This dock is mine. My boat is mine. Your rules don't apply here." The look on her face could have curdled milk. From that day forward, I knew I was a target. Chapter 3. The harassment begins. At first, it was small things. Anonymous complaints about noise when I ran my boat engine at noon on a Saturday. Letters left in my mailbox demanding I pay HOA fees, even though legally I didn't owe them a dime. People I didn't even know would glare at me when I drove past the neighborhood clubhouse. Then came the sabotage. My dock lines were mysteriously untied one night, leaving my boat drifting out into the lake. Luckily, I caught it in time before it crashed against the rocks. A week later, someone dumped paint across the windshield. Another time, my tires were slashed. It was obvious who was behind it, but without proof, I couldn't go to the police. Chapter 4. Fire on the water. The breaking point came one humid summer night. I had just finished a late dinner when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought one of the neighbors was having a bonfire. Then I heard a crackling roar, the unmistakable sound of flames feeding on wood and fiberglass. I sprinted to the dock. My boat was engulfed. Flames shot 10 feet into the air, black smoke rolling across the water. The heat was so intense I couldn't get within 30 feet. I called the fire department, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left but a smoldering skeleton floating in the lake. I stood there, fists clenched, eyes burning, not just from the smoke, but from rage. That boat had been my dream, my escape, and someone had reduced it to ashes. The fire marshal confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't an accident. The accelerant traces were obvious. Someone had torched my boat deliberately, and I knew exactly who had ordered it. Chapter 5. My secret weapon. What the HOA didn't know was that I wasn't just some quiet guy living by the lake. By profession, I was a forensic accountant. My specialty was tracking hidden money, exposing fraud, and following financial trails people desperately tried to bury. If the HOA wanted war, they had just declared it, and I was more than prepared to fight back. I started digging. Public records, tax filings, HOA meeting minutes, county liens, I devoured them all. Then I hacked deeper, not illegally, but using every legal and professional trick I knew. I requested financial disclosures that HOAs are required by law to provide. I compared numbers, tracked transfers, and scrutinized expenses. What I found was enough to make my blood run cold. The HOA board, led by Karen, had been embezzling funds. Thousands of dollars in maintenance fees had been siphoned off into private accounts. Fake landscaping invoices, bogus marina repairs, even a line item for community improvement grants that led straight to a shell company in Karen's husband's name. They hadn't just stolen my boat. They were stealing from everyone in the neighborhood. Chapter 6. Turning the tables. I put together a dossier, hundreds of pages of documents, charts, and undeniable proof. Every shady transaction, every forged receipt, every penny stolen. I cross-referenced everything until the case was airtight. Then I made my move. First, I sent anonymous packets to the residents of the HOA. Every homeowner woke up one morning to find a thick envelope on their doorstep, detailing how their dues had been pocketed by the very people who claimed to protect property values. Second, I filed formal complaints with the state attorney general's office and the county's fraud division. HOAs might think they're powerful, but when the government gets involved, their little fiefdoms collapse fast. Finally, I reached out to my contacts in the banking world. With my credentials, I had no trouble convincing regulators to freeze the HOA's accounts pending investigation. Overnight, their war chest evaporated. No money for legal fees. No slush fund for Karen's shopping sprees. No cash to pay off their cronies. The mighty HOA was broke. Chapter 7. The fallout. The neighborhood was chaos. People stormed the clubhouse demanding answers. Karen tried to hold an emergency meeting, but when angry residents waved the financial reports in her face, she panicked. Someone recorded her meltdown and posted it online. Within hours, it went viral. The police soon followed. Investigators seized computers, files, and anything else connected to the HOA's finances. Karen and 2 other board members were arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and arson conspiracy. Yes, arson. Turns out one of the hired maintenance workers had confessed. He'd been paid cash to torch my boat as a warning. He cut a deal with prosecutors, and his testimony sealed their fate. Chapter 8. Victory on the water. Months later, I stood on my rebuilt dock, staring at the lake. My insurance had covered most of the boat's value, and I had already ordered a new one, a bigger, better model. But the real victory wasn't material. The HOA was dissolved. Without funds, without leadership, and under the weight of lawsuits, it collapsed completely. Homeowners voted unanimously to terminate it. People were free again. No more ridiculous fines, no more power trips, no more harassment. As for Karen, she was sentenced to prison. The last I heard, she was serving time in a minimum security facility, far away from clipboards and bylaws. I exhaled deeply, the cool evening air filling my lungs. The water shimmered in front of me, peaceful again. They had tried to intimidate me, to break me by destroying something I loved. But they underestimated me. In the end, they lost everything. And I gained something better than revenge. I gained freedom, not just for myself, but for the entire community. And as my new boat slid into the water for the first time, I smiled. The lake was mine again. When I first bought my house, I thought I had struck gold. It sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, with tall oak trees shading the front yard and a wide driveway that curved down to my garage. For years, I had lived in cramped apartments, dreaming of a place where I could finally stretch out and breathe. The house was perfect, or at least it was until the homeowners association got involved. I knew they existed. Every neighborhood with manicured lawns and matching mailboxes seems to have one. But according to the deed, my property was technically outside their jurisdiction. I wasn't required to pay their fees, attend their meetings, or follow their endless list of ridiculous rules. My land was my land. Unfortunately, nobody told that to the HOA president, a man named Gregory Lewis. He had a smug smile, the kind of handshake that tried to crush your knuckles, and an attitude that screamed, "I run this place." Chapter 2. The first warning. It started small. A letter tucked under my windshield wiper, reminding me that all driveways in the community must be pressure washed twice a year. I tossed it in the trash. Next came a knock at the door. Gregory stood there, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd been plucked from a bad reality show. "We noticed you haven't paid your HOA dues," he said smoothly. "I don't have to," I replied, holding up my deed. "This property isn't part of your association." His smile faltered. "We'll see about that." I shut the door. That was the first time I realized just how far Gregory would go to prove a point. Chapter 3. Escalation. Weeks passed. Then came the petty harassment. Anonymous complaints to the county about my trash cans being left out too long. Someone sprayed herbicide along my flower beds, killing the roses my late wife had planted years ago. One morning, I came outside to find graffiti sprayed across my garage door. HOA rules apply to everyone. I filed police reports, but without proof, nothing stuck. The final straw came on a Monday morning. I left for work, only to find a brand new chain link fence stretched across the end of my driveway, padlock shut. My truck was trapped inside. There was no permit, no notice, nothing. Just a smug HOA crew standing nearby, pretending to be enforcing community standards. I called Gregory. He didn't even try to hide his glee. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before ignoring the HOA," he said, then hung up. That was it. They wanted war? They'd just declared it. Chapter 4. Digging for dirt by day, I worked as an IT consultant. But my real specialty was research. Deep, thorough, relentless research. I decided to treat the HOA like a client. If they wanted to play dirty, I would peel back every layer of their operation until I found their weakest point. I started with the basics. HOA financial reports are technically public to residents, and while I wasn't a member, I had a friend in the neighborhood who was more than willing to share copies. Within hours, I had spreadsheets covering dues, expenses, and so-called improvement projects. Something didn't add up. Tens of thousands of dollars marked as landscaping vanished every year, yet the common areas looked neglected. The community center renovation was budgeted at $150,000, but my friends swore no renovations had taken place. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The treasurer of the HOA had a brother-in-law who ran a construction company. Payments flowed to his business, but no actual work was done. Classic embezzlement. Chapter 5. Planting seeds. I didn't want to go to the authorities just yet. First, I wanted to turn the community itself against Gregory and his board. I started small. Flyers tucked discreetly under doors, showing simple pie charts comparing dues collected versus actual improvements delivered. Anonymous emails with attachments detailing fake invoices. Rumors whispered at neighborhood barbecues. The more people looked, the more they realized the truth. They were being robbed blind. Homeowners who once glared at me for not following HOA rules began to nod in quiet solidarity. I was no longer the outsider. I was the guy exposing the corruption they'd been too scared to confront. Chapter 6. The breaking point. Gregory must have sensed the tide turning. One night, as I walked back from the mailbox, his SUV screeched to a stop in front of my house. He rolled down the window, his face red with rage. "You think you're clever?" he shouted. "You think you can tear down everything we've built?" I smiled. "No, Gregory. I think you did that yourself." He sped off, tires squealing, but his anger told me I was hitting the right nerve. Days later, the police showed up, not for me but for him. Someone had tipped off the county fraud division with detailed financial records. I had, of course, made sure every report, every spreadsheet, every suspicious transfer was impossible to trace back to me. Chapter 7. Collapse. The investigation tore through the HOA like a wildfire. The treasurer was arrested first, then the secretary, then Gregory himself. Embezzlement, tax fraud, wire fraud, the list went on. With the board behind bars and the bank accounts frozen, the HOA couldn't function. No one to collect dues, no one to enforce fines, no one to waste money on fake projects. The homeowners held an emergency vote. With overwhelming support, they dissolved the HOA completely. And that fence across my driveway? The county sent a crew to tear it down. Gregory's handiwork was reduced to twisted metal, carted off to the junkyard. Chapter 8. Freedom restored. Weeks later, I stood in my driveway, staring at the open road beyond. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt peace. No more harassment, no more petty rules, no more power-hungry neighbors pretending they were kings of the block. My house was mine again. My land was mine again. The neighborhood began to heal. Without the constant pressure of the HOA, people started talking to one another instead of spying. Kids played in yards without fear of violations. Families repainted their homes in colors they actually liked. As for Gregory, the last I heard, he was still awaiting trial. His empire of intimidation had crumbled, and all he had left was a reputation as the man who tried to fence in the wrong homeowner. Chapter 9. The lesson. Looking back, I realized something important. Bullies thrive when people stay silent. HOAs like Gregory survive by convincing homeowners that rules are absolute, that resistance is futile. But the truth is, they only have as much power as you let them. They tried to break me. They tried to trap me. But in the end, their greed destroyed them. And I was free. When I bought my small farm on the edge of town, I knew it wasn't just a piece of property. It was a legacy. The Red Barn had stood for nearly 100 years, built by the hands of a man who had once been a soldier, then a farmer, then a father who poured his life into the land. To me, that barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was a reminder that hard work, sweat, and stubborn determination meant something. I restored it myself, plank by plank, roof shingle by roof shingle, until it stood tall again against the horizon. But the homeowners association next door, the one that had gobbled up half the farmland and turned it into cookie-cutter houses, didn't see it that way. To them, my barn was an eyesore, a relic that didn't fit their community aesthetic. And so the war began. Chapter 2. The first threats. It started with letters. Neatly folded notices stuffed into my mailbox, claiming that my barn violated structural codes and neighborhood harmony standards. I ignored them. My property was outside their HOA jurisdiction. They had no authority here. But the letters kept coming. Then came knocks on my door. Their president, a slick man named Philip, stood there one Saturday morning in a blazer despite the 90-degree heat. He looked at my barn like it was a pile of garbage. "We're offering to buy your property," he said. "Tear down that barn. Expand our subdivision. You'll make a good profit." I laughed in his face. "This barn isn't for sale. And neither is my land." His smile thinned into a sneer. "You'll regret that." Chapter 3. Harassment. The next few months were hell. Anonymous complaints flooded the county office. False reports of unsafe structures, noise violations, even accusations that I was running an illegal business from my barn. Someone slashed my tractor tires. Another time, I woke up to find my barn doors spray painted with the words, "Tear it down." I replaced the doors, repaired the tractor, filed police reports. But without witnesses, nothing stuck. It was clear. The HOA wanted me gone. Chapter 4. The bulldozer incident. One morning, I was jolted awake by the roar of heavy machinery. I looked out my window and nearly collapsed from rage. A bulldozer was parked at the edge of my property, its blade angled straight at my barn. Behind it stood Philip, arms crossed, smirking like a king surveying conquered land. I ran out, shotgun in hand. "Step 1 foot on my land and you'll regret it," I shouted. He raised his eyebrows, mockingly. "It's only a matter of time. That barn is coming down, whether you like it or not." The bulldozer backed off, but the message was clear. They were ready to destroy what was mine. Chapter 5. My counterattack. They thought I was just a farmer with a stubborn streak. What they didn't know was that I had spent 20 years as a land surveyor and consultant for real estate disputes. I knew property law inside and out. I began digging, literally and legally. I combed through county land records, deeds, and surveys. I discovered something shocking. The HOA had built several of their community amenities, including their fancy clubhouse and tennis courts, on land that technically wasn't theirs. The original boundaries had been filed incorrectly, and half their precious clubhouse sat squarely on county-owned property. With that knowledge, I filed a quiet complaint with the county. It triggered a review, and suddenly inspectors were crawling all over the HOA development with clipboards and cameras. Chapter 6. Turning the community. While the county did its work, I started turning neighbors against the HOA. Many of them were sick of rising fees, constant fines, and Philip's arrogant leadership. I invited families to my barn for community barbecues, free of rules and restrictions. Kids played in the fields, parents laughed around campfires, and everyone got a taste of freedom. Slowly, the narrative shifted. The barn wasn't an eyesore anymore, it was a symbol. A reminder of what life could be like without HOA tyranny. Chapter 7. The lawsuit. The county's investigation hit the HOA like a sledgehammer. Their clubhouse and tennis courts were deemed encroachments on public land. Not only that, but financial audits revealed misused funds. Philip had been funneling dues into shell companies tied to his relatives. I gathered everything, every document, every complaint, every witness statement, and delivered it to a lawyer friend. Together, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of myself and several neighbors. The charges? Fraud, land misappropriation, harassment, and attempted property destruction. Chapter 8. Collapse. The court case dragged on for months, but the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA accounts were frozen, their board members indicted. Philip himself was led away in handcuffs after it was revealed he had approved the bulldozer stunt without any permits. With their leadership gone, the HOA crumbled. Homeowners voted to dissolve it completely, tired of the corruption and bullying. As for the land they had illegally claimed, the county decided to seize it back, and on my suggestion, they turned it into a public park. Trails wound through the fields, kids played on playgrounds, and families picnicked where Philip's empire once stood. Chapter 9. My victory on the park's opening day. I stood on my barn's porch, watching dozens of families walk past my fields to the new trails. The barn stood tall, stronger than ever, the red paint gleaming in the sun. Neighbors waved at me, grateful. Many came up to shake my hand, thanking me for standing up when they had been too afraid. I realized then that my fight hadn't just been for my barn. It had been for everyone tired of being bullied by power-hungry HOAs. Philip had tried to bulldoze my legacy. Instead, I bulldozed his kingdom. And the barn? It still stood. When I bought my house on the edge of Maplewood Estates, I wanted peace. After working 25 years as a machinist, I was finally ready to slow down. The property had a large backyard with a detached workshop where I rebuilt engines, made furniture, and sometimes just tinkered to pass the time. That workshop was my pride. I had wired it myself, installed skylights, and lined the walls with tools collected over decades. It wasn't just a building.
It was my sanctuary.
Of course, Maplewood had a homeowners association. They called themselves protectors of community values, but I saw them for what they were, petty tyrants with clipboards. My deed was clear. My property predated the HOA's formation. I wasn't a member, and their rules didn't apply to me. At least, that's what I thought. Chapter 2. The HOA president was a man named Walter Briggs. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smirk that made you want to break something, Walter had run the board like a dictatorship for nearly a decade. He loved rules, fines, and above all, control. One evening, he walked into my yard uninvited, eyeing my workshop. "That structure violates Maplewood's design code," he announced. "It's not your business," I replied calmly. "This property isn't under your HOA." Walter's smirk deepened. "We'll see about that." Chapter 3. Harassment. It began with letters. Neatly typed notices demanding I remove my workshop. Threats of fines I didn't legally owe. Warnings that non-compliance would lead to action. Then came the sabotage. My power was cut twice, lines mysteriously severed underground. Someone shattered a window in the workshop. Tools went missing. I reported everything to the police, but with no evidence, they shrugged. Walter and his board grew bolder. Chapter 4. The day of destruction. One morning, I left for groceries. When I returned, my heart nearly stopped. My workshop was gone. In its place was a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal. A demolition crew was packing up their equipment, and standing nearby was Walter, arms folded, smirking. "You're welcome," he said. "We took care of your violation." "You destroyed my property," I roared. He shrugged. "Consider it a community improvement. You can thank us later." I wanted to hit him, but instead I took photos. Dozens of them. Every broken beam, every smashed tool, every smug expression on Walter's face. They thought they had won. But I wasn't done. Chapter 5. My profession. The HOA didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a machinist. Over the years, I had worked as a consultant for construction disputes. I knew property law. I knew zoning regulations. And I had friends, lawyers, inspectors, even a county judge, who respected my work. I compiled everything: photos, demolition permits, or rather, the lack of them, and witness statements from neighbors horrified by what they had seen. The crew Walter had hired? They admitted he told them he had authority. He didn't. My case was airtight. Chapter 6. Filing a lawsuit. I filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA for unlawful demolition, trespassing, property damage, and harassment. But I didn't stop there. With the help of a lawyer friend, we uncovered financial records. Turns out, Maplewood's HOA had been misusing funds for years. Dues meant for community maintenance were funneled into consulting contracts tied to Walter's relatives. Landscaping invoices?
Fake.
Renovation expenses? Non-existent. I amended the lawsuit to include fraud and embezzlement. Chapter 7. The community turns. At first, many neighbors supported Walter. They believed his story, that my workshop was illegal, that I was a stubborn troublemaker. But when word spread about the fraud, everything changed. I released documents anonymously. People earned their dues, had paid for Walter's vacations, his new truck, even private golf club memberships. Soon, angry residents stormed HOA meetings. They demanded answers, shouting Walter down. The once proud president began to sweat. Chapter 8. The court battle. The case went to trial. For weeks, lawyers tore into the HOA's records. Witnesses testified about harassment, illegal demolitions, and forged permits. The demolition crew confirmed Walter had lied. I sat calmly through it all, watching the empire of control crumble. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. The HOA was ordered to pay damages, nearly $750,000. Enough to rebuild my workshop 3 times over. But the real blow came when the judge ruled that Maplewood's HOA board members were personally liable for fraud. Their homes, their savings, their cars, all fair game for restitution. Chapter 9. The aftermath. Walter lost everything. His house was seized, his accounts drained, his reputation shredded. He moved out of Maplewood in shame, chased by the very neighbors he once ruled. The HOA was dissolved. Residents voted unanimously to terminate it, sick of corruption and tyranny. Freed from its grip, families repainted their homes, parked RVs in their driveways, and lived without fear of fines. And me? I rebuilt my workshop. Bigger, stronger, with reinforced walls and a brand new set of tools. Neighbors even pitched in, grateful that I had exposed the rot. Chapter 10. My victory. On the first night after the rebuild, I sat in my new workshop, lights glowing warmly, the smell of fresh sawdust in the air. I ran my hands along the smooth workbench, feeling pride swell in my chest. They had tried to destroy me. They had tried to erase my sanctuary. But in the end, I had taken everything from them. The HOA thought they were invincible. They thought rules and threats could break me. Instead, I broke them. And my workshop? It stood taller than ever, a monument to resistance.